What's up, Gear Mortals? Trey Xavier here. On today's edition of Gear God's Quality Control, we're going to be taking a look at the MIDI Commander MIDI Footswitch pedal from MeloAudio. Now, of course, a MIDI Footswitch pedal is not the most exciting piece of gear on the planet. It's sort of mundane, but really what it has to do is its job, and it has to do it well, and it has to do it consistently, and you have to get what you expect when you step on a button on a MIDI Footswitch pedal like this. Because if you're on the gig or in the studio and you step on the button and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, you're gonna be very sad, and so will your audience. So we gotta figure out if the MIDI Commander does all that. There's a couple different aspects you have to look at when you're picking out a MIDI Footswitch pedal. Durability, how it's going to be powered, whether or not it'll do all the things that you need to do for the kinds of pedals or gear that you're using it to switch. Today we're just using it with the HX Stomp, which is very MIDI friendly, but some things aren't quite so easy to use MIDI with. Is it possible to program it to do everything that you need it for? So we're gonna take a look at all that today. Having had the MIDI Commander for around a month, I feel like it's very solidly built, very rugged. It's all metal with the exception of a couple small plastic parts. The rings around the foot switches are plastic, but I don't think that they're structurally integral to the foot switch itself. You can see there's the little metal part that actually protrudes through the metal faceplate is right there, and then the plastic ring is just sort of around it for, I don't know, reinforcement, maybe decoration. I feel like that's a thing that could potentially break over time, but I didn't experience that. And like I said, even if it did, I don't think it would affect the performance. Each one of these foot switches has a little LED light on it that turns on and off when you switch from one thing to the next. It's got a grand total of 10 buttons and a little tiny LCD screen that gives you a readout on a bunch of different things. For example, the display shows you where in its range either of the two expression pedals you can have plugged in is, from 0 to 127. So that's really helpful to see exactly how your expression pedal is working with the MIDI Commander and what signal it's sending to the thing that you're using it for. Today we're using the HX Stomp as our sound bank to test out the different functions of the MIDI Commander. When I plugged it in, it worked right away for the basic functions that I wanted it to. As a guitar player, I need a MIDI foot switch to do a pretty limited number of things, but it has to do them right. And that's to switch patches on either my modeler or the channels on an amp. It needs to be able to control complicated MIDI pedals like the H9 from Eventide, like we reviewed a couple months ago. And it needs to be able to do changes like stomp box style, for example, latching type of switching, like this top row here. I can turn on several of them or turn them off, and they'll stay on or off. And then I need to be able to change banks within either the modeler or an effects unit, like a rack effects unit, like a TC Electronic G Major, something like that. The other thing it has to do is be able to take expression pedals or have a built-in expression pedal like some MIDI controllers do. So far, the MIDI Commander is able to do all of those things. When I first plugged it into the HX Stomp and tried it right away, it worked just without me having to program anything in the manner in which I expected it to work. It was just plug and play. Each one of these buttons switches to a different patch in the bank that I'm using, and then these buttons bank up and down, and I can go through them just like that. The top row is kind of blank. It's a sort of a blank slate for you to program in whatever. Now you can, of course, program it to do other things than that, but it was just awesome that I could just plug it right in, and it seemed to be universal enough that it just worked exactly how I expected it to. It has several preset modes that you can access on startup, and they're programmed for things like the axe effects, bias effects, the amplifier series from Atomic, stuff like that. It has a couple of preset modes and then 2 custom modes that you can set up yourself. And that's what we're using right now, just the custom 1 patch. The way that most modern MIDI devices work is that they have a learn function. And this is to keep you from having to be a MIDI wizard. You don't have to go in and program exact numbers and channels and all this stuff. All you have to do is set the thing to learn, and then you push the button on the MIDI controller and it just knows which button you pushed, and it assigns that function within the modeler to that button. So then from then on, when you push that button, it does that thing, which is really great because I'm not incredibly MIDI literate. I have a very basic understanding of how to do things in MIDI, and this made it really easy. For example, I've got this expression pedal that will control the wah, but if I want to assign one of these buttons to turn the wah on or off, then I have to go into the HX stomp, go to where it's at, and then go to bypass assign, and then page over to the learn function. Now I push this button, and the HX stomp knows that I want to turn the wah on and off that way. The MIDI Commander can be powered either by 2 AAA batteries or via USB, and it also will work USB MIDI for controlling things on a computer or a tablet or any kind of device. If you have the right connector, it'll take a typical USB cable, this kind, the sort of more square one, I don't remember what it's called exactly, and you can power the MIDI Commander over that, as well as send MIDI information over that to switch. Like, for instance, if you're using a laptop kind of a rig, or you're using your iPad as a rig, using Amplitude on your iPad or Bias Effects or anything like that, you can use this to switch those things as well. And one especially useful thing about that is that you can't really plug an expression pedal directly into an interface to get the expression pedal information into something like Bias Effects. So you have to use something to convert it into MIDI first, which is really handy to have something like this to do that exactly. So right now I have this Moog expression pedal plugged in, and this is the 3rd expression pedal that I tried with the MIDI Commander. The first 2 encountered some serious problems, and as far as I know, it's not in the instruction manual anywhere, but as far as I know, there's no way to calibrate your expression pedal with the MIDI Commander. The first expression pedal I tried was the Mission Engineering one, and I plugged it in, and at first it seemed like nothing was happening at all, but then I noticed that the MIDI control numbers were going up like 1 per second. It just wasn't happening. Almost nothing happened. It would just, over the course of like a minute, the bar would fill up. After that, I tried the Volume X Mini from Dunlop, and that had a problem where the first like 10% of the sweep would go all the way up, and then after that, no change. So that was weird. And then I plugged the Moog one in. Once I figured out that there's this switch on the bottom that says standard or other, it worked once I switched it to other. And now it works great. I will demonstrate for you right now, actually. And if you're pretty savvy with your effects, you can set it up so there's 4 buttons per patch that are sort of wild cards to do whatever you want them to. So I have my patches set up pretty simply, just rhythm, lead, clean, and crunch, thusly. Clean patch. And then crunch. So let's say I want to use this same patch, but I want it to be slightly less crunchy sometimes. I could, for example, head over to the tube screamer sound I've got in here, and then go back to bypass assign, go over to learn, and then hit that button, and then I can turn the tube screamer off. Pretty awesome, super easy to do. Some of the shortcomings of the MIDI Commander are that there's only 9 banks of 4 buttons each. So if you use a ton of different banks of sounds, you might be a little disappointed in how many you can access. But it's also an extremely compact pedal with a lot of buttons in a very small space. So it's kind of all about efficiency. I wish that there were more, but it just goes up to 9 and then back to 1. So if you don't have hundreds and hundreds of sounds that you need to access, this might be good for you. I personally have very simple needs, so this would work really well for my setup because I don't use that many patches. But if you have, 200 patches you have to go through in a gig for whatever reason, you might be SOL with this one. One potential shortcoming of the MIDI Commander is that it can only be powered via USB or batteries. So that means that you can't plug it into like your pedal power supply or something like that. If it goes out during a gig, you can't plug it into anything if you don't have a USB power supply on your board, which is pretty likely. I don't really see those all that often. I think you could just plug it into like a USB power brick and power it like that if you have a plug on your board, but that might be a hassle. It gets a lot of life out of a single charge on the batteries, and you can actually charge, if you have rechargeable batteries and you plug it in USB, it'll charge the batteries in the pedal. Another thing I really liked about it is the door for the batteries is a little sliding thing, so you don't have to pop something off and then lose it. This is a really clever design. I like this a lot. The action on it is pretty nice too. It just kind of slides to the side, pop them out, pop them back in, boom. So I think that's one area in which this could be improved. If they just added a jack for like a 9-volt center negative pedal power supply kind of a thing, you know, just to kind of keep it going under any circumstances, or to just give it a more permanent place on your board. Because if you have to be pulling it off and pulling the batteries out all the time, that kind of sucks. Some of the things I really liked about it is the form factor. I'm all about compact. Of course, I've got the HX Stomp. This is one of my favorite things in the world, and this is not that much bigger. I like anything that's small and gets the job done and stays out of the way. This could, of course, run your whole rig, and I like that a lot. The MIDI Commander goes for about $150, which is the same price as the FCB 1010 from Behringer, which is, I'm pretty sure, the most popular MIDI foot switch on the market. And the Behringer one is kind of enormous. I used that for a long time, and it's pretty great. But this one is a little more modern, I think, and for something that you can fit on your pedal board with a lot of other stuff, this is definitely the way to go. Something else that could be improved is if they added some way to calibrate your expression pedal with the MIDI Commander, then you wouldn't have to get specific pedals with it. In the manual, there's like, they list 3 of them that work, that they've tested that work with it. This wasn't one of them. I didn't have any of them just lying around, so I had to just find one and test it out and see if it worked. I can tell you from experience, literally sitting here just now, you saw me use it, the Moog EP3 works great with the MIDI Commander. So in conclusion, the MIDI Commander is not without its limitations, but it does get the job done for most typical scenarios that you're gonna need a MIDI foot switch pedal for. I think that if you're really super picky or you need something really powerful, the MIDI Commander might not be for you, but for everything that I needed it for, it performed very admirably, got the job done, and it has all the features that I personally needed. It's a very simple pedal, it's powerful enough, and it's priced reasonably well. I think it probably could be a little bit cheaper if they want to compete with the FCB 1010, but for the size and functionality, it's tough to beat. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you haven't already, mash that subscribe button for more reviews and original content. And if you want to join our Patreon cult, like these fine cultists right here on this list, you're going to want to head over to patreon.com/geargods and sign up there, and I'll see you real soon.